and we're here, and it's time for another monthly recommendations video. In case you don't know, Monthly Recommendations is a Goodreads group hosted by Kayla Rain and Trina from Between Chapters, and each month there is a topic of books to recommend, and everyone in the group, they post it on their channel or on their blog and talk about the books that they like with that topic. And this month we are talking about big books. And I love big books. I really love a big, fat book that's kind of heavy sometimes. And it's just great. And it makes my heart really happy. Yeah. So, and it's also perfect timing because the Tome Topple is coming up. Or we're going to be in the middle of Tome Topple when this goes up. I don't know. Something like that. I haven't figured out when I'm posting this yet. But, in case you need ideas for big books that you can just really sink into, this is the place to be. And I have my big books right here. So let's get into it. The first one we have is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Now, I'm sure tons of people are talking about this book, and they should be, because it's amazing. It's huge, and the second book is even bigger. Like, this one is over 700 pages long, and the second book is over 1,000 pages long. Like, it's big. It's a big book. But they're so good. It is a story within a story where we meet Kavath, and he's kind of like a legend in his land, and someone comes to him and they want to hear his story, and so he tells his story of when he went to university and his history with his parents and his family and his adventures, and it's great. And so this first book goes into his childhood and his first year at a magical university, and so that's super fun. And I will say that it does go a little bit slower, which is usually what happens with big books. Like, big books are going to go a little bit slower than your other books. And so you kind of have to get into that mindset when you read a big book. And so if you're one that really likes a lot of action-packed fantasy, this might not be for you. But if you really love really great characters and world building and just awesome and being able to relate to student loans, but in a fantasy world, then hey, this book is for you. Then we have a book I just finished reading not that long ago, and that is Written and Read by Anne Bishop. Now, it's not quite 500 pages. It's just below 500 pages. That's like 480-something pages. So it's practically 500. And that's kind of the standard that we're having for the large books, is like if it's at least 500 pages. But this one is just so good, and I just had to recommend it because it is an open fantasy, but as I was reading it, I was thinking, like, this is a really great book for people who don't like open fantasy. Like, people who do like open fantasy, like, you're really gonna love it too, but people who really aren't into that genre, they might enjoy this one more because it's more slow-moving, it's more character and world-building based versus action-based, and just it's so good. It's about Meg, and she is a blood prophet, and she's been like locked up her whole life, and she's escaped, and now she's working for the others. And Simon Wolfgard is, you guessed it, he can turn into a wolf, and she starts working for him, and it's this great slow burn, and just kind of figuring out her past and who she is and what's going on with her. And I just really fully adored this book. Like, I just sank into it and enjoyed this fantastic, amazing world building. And I think it did a great job of also with the others, the wolves and the shapeshifters. Like, I think it did one of the best jobs I've seen of really showing that they are not human. Because I feel like in a lot of open fantasy, like, you can tell, like, oh, like, they're not really human. They're shapeshifters and vampires, but they still kind of feel really human. Like, this book, you could definitely be like, yeah, nope, they're not human at all. And it's really, really cool. So, yeah, I adored this book. Now, my next recommendation is going to be slightly controversial, maybe, but hear me out. Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I know, like, some people, like, they love Outlander or they hate Outlander. I love it. At least the first book. I've only read the first two books, and I like the second one, but not quite as much as the first one, and I actually would argue that this would have been a really good standalone. So there's that, and there are definitely some problematic elements in the Outlander series when it comes to like relationships and stuff. I personally feel like most of the really big problematic elements are in the second one, and like there's a few in the first one, but you can kind of like it's not quite as bad. But I remember reading this book. It is over like 800 pages, I think. Yeah, it's over 800 pages long, but I read it in like 2 or 3 days. Like, I breezed through it. I absolutely loved it, and it is a time travel because the main character of Claire, she is in the 1940s, post-World War II, and then she time travels back to the 1700s Scotland. And there is that element of time travel, but I consider it more of a historical fiction versus a sci-fi or fantasy book. And I loved the love story. I love the historical context of it. And my friend who recommended this series to me, what she loved about it and what she explained to me that I really love too, is that the characters are both victims and heroes at the same time. Like, some truly awful, awful things happen to them. And sometimes they need to be saved and they need to learn to deal with these awful things that happen. But on the other hand, those same characters then have to go save somebody else too. And they have to be the hero and step up to the plate. And so it's a really, really cool dynamic. And I will say, if you are interested in the story of Outlander, but you don't necessarily want to read a really, really big book and dedicate yourself to the series, or you don't really want to get into it because of the problematic elements of it, I actually really recommend the TV show if you don't want to read the book. And I think that's totally okay, and I know that's like booktube heresy. But I've been watching the TV show. I've seen the first 2 seasons, which are based on the first 2 books, and all of the problematic elements are kind of pretty much fixed in the TV show, and I think it does a great job of adapting to the books and keeping the heart of the books and the intent of the books, but doing it in a non-problematic way, and it's really, really awesome, and I just really love the TV show. So maybe that might be an option if you don't want to read it. Next up, we have The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey Niffenegger, I believe is how you say her name, and I actually listened to this on audio a few years ago, and I adored it. There is a movie of The Time Traveler's Wife, and it's okay, it's fine, it's a fine movie, but it does not capture how enchanting this story is. So basically, there is Henry who time travels, and then there is his wife, another Claire, look at that, time travel and Claire's, and it goes back and forth between their 2 perspectives and their 2 different timelines, kind of, because she first meets him when she's a child, but he first meets her when he's an adult, and then their timelines kind of like come together. It is a sci-fi fantasy, but it feels more like a contemporary / literary fiction book and a romance, and it's just really, really beautiful and emotional, and I love it. Next, we have The Greatest Night by Elizabeth Chadwick, and this is one of my all-time favorite books for forever. All of her books are over 500 pages long, so they all would fit, and I highly recommend any of them, but this one is my favorite. It's the one that got me into Elizabeth Chadwick's books, and it's the one I recommend to everyone who's just starting out with her. This is a fictionalized version of the life of a real person who, from the medieval time period, William Marshall. He was a knight, and he served under King Richard, of like the Robin Hood time period, if that gives you more context. And it is just beautiful. Like, all of the events in this book were real events that happened. She just put them in a novelized form, and she really is a historian at heart, and so many things are so incredibly historically accurate, and so you're getting this like really awesome history lesson, but you don't realize you're getting a history lesson because it's just this like great novel and a great character. And I'm just completely in love with Elizabeth Chadwick's writing. I'm in love with William Marshall. And yeah, if you love historical fiction and you haven't read Elizabeth Chadwick, I don't know where you've been, because you have to read her if you like historical fiction. You just have to. Then there is Grave Mercy by Robin Lefevre, and this is the first book in the His Fair Assassin trilogy. It is a young adult kind of paranormal historical book, although I consider it a little bit more new adult. I don't necessarily consider it young adult, but whatever, that line's kind of blurry. And the first book is actually the longest of the 3, and it is one I recently reread, and I had forgotten how much I loved it. Like, I knew I really loved this trilogy, But then I reread this book and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is incredible. And it is about these girls who are the handmaidens for the god of death. Basically, they're nuns and they're assassins. Like, I don't know how much more of a selling point you need. And it's definitely more of a historical fiction versus a paranormal. Like the paranormal, fantasy, sci-fi-y, not really sci-fi, but you know, that kind of element of it is super, super light. So it's far more of a historical book than all of that. And it goes into a lot of the political drama of the time period. And it's just beautiful. It is like a medieval time period, and I love the romance in it. I love the girl power. I love the friendships and the discussion of faith, and I just really love this whole trilogy, and I've been rereading it, and it's glorious. The last book on my recommendations list is the Mug of the Lion trilogy by Francine Rivers. The first book is The Voice in the Wind, and this is a historical Christian fiction trilogy, and it takes place in ancient Rome, right after the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ, and he ascended, and all of that, and kind of like during the time of the apostles, where like the apostle Paul was traveling around and preaching the gospel. And I really need to go back and reread this trilogy because a lot of my mindset and my views have changed since I first read it, so I think it'd be really interesting to go back and reread it. But I just remember really loving these characters. You get so many different perspectives and views of this time period, and there's also great romances and examination of faith and all of that. And so if you're into Christian fiction, I highly recommend Francine Rivers because I feel like she's one of the best Christian authors who really does a lot in being sure that, like, yeah, she has, like, her faith in the story, but the story and the characters are what drive it and make it really, really good. Like, so there you have it. Those are my recommendations for big tome books that are over 500 pages. And yeah, I have even more that I could recommend, but there's only so much time in these videos without making it crazy long. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want more recommendations of big books, let me know, and I can give them to you in the comments. If you have recommendations for me, let me know, or tell me that you made your own video, and I'll go check it out. And I will see you all later.